Now, the first thing that you're going to notice is that each of the bases is connected specifically to a sense. And of course, that becomes very significant. In other words, you will see that where the base is focused on a particular sense, that sense is going to be the heightened instrument through which the various aspects will operate in the whole design. In other words, for example, somebody with seeing, that at the human level, that the visual, that is the visual context, is going to be the dominant theme for them. You know, considering that this is all about movement and measurement, they need to see it. I mean, they need to see it. They need to really see it. They need to see how it works. You know, they need to see the details. They need to see all of these things. This is life. Now, of course, if you go down to more simple forms of life, the first thing that you can see in terms of dealing with this general term of seeing is that you're really dealing with the response to or the recognition of light. It's all about light. And it's all about the response to light. Remember, this is a yang facet. And as a yang facet, the light is a big deal. I mean, after all, the Maya is wrapped in light. It's a big deal. So the seeing that we have at the human level, that's the way that we live out the impact of this facet. But it also means something very basic about what we understand as human life. That is, one of the first things making us different is the way in which our vision operates. Now, if you look around, for example, in the animal world, in the mammalian world, you're not going to find this way in which the eyes have been brought together into the front of the head. It's something that's actually quite unusual. And we have a very specific kind and very important kind of vision. The other thing is we have a color mutation. I always try to remember his name, and I never remember his name, and I really like what he does. The guy that wrote the book, The Man Who Thought His Wife Was a Hat? Sachs. Oliver Sacks. Oliver Sacks. There's this extraordinary, Oliver Sacks is a neuro something or other. And he does tremendous amount of investigation into what happens to people with unusual accidents or experiences in the brain in order to try to understand various places in the brain and how they operate. And this is a delightful, my sense of humor. This is an extraordinary story. There's a guy driving in his car. He's an artist, and he's a very successful graphic artist in New York. And he's driving in his car, and he has a heart attack, a stroke. And in having that stroke, you know, his car bangs into something, he loses consciousness, whatever the case may be, blah, blah, blah. He wakes up, whatever, in the hospital, and he doesn't see in color anymore. All his color vision is gone. What he is seeing is everything is in different shades of gray. Everything. I mean, he's a graphic artist after all. And everything is just in these weird shades of gray. He found, for example, that at night he could see tremendous distances, you know, and see things with certain clarity. But he's an artist after all. There were no colors. And what was interesting was, you know, if he stopped painting, he lost his living. And of course, he had a palette. And he knew from being an artist for many, many years, you know, what colors were in the palette, and he tried to continue his work as an artist, and of course it didn't work. I mean, at first people thought it was really bizarre, because it seems all right, but you know there's no color sense, and then he started to paint what he could see. Now, what they found in all of that is something really incredible. You know, what they found is 9 molecules that permit us to see in color. 9 molecules. You know, this is really tiny stuff compared to the mass of what we are. It's those 9 little molecules that are in control of our color vision. Now, he had a stroke. The blood was cut off from those molecules. And of course, they were damaged, and it changed his vision. I love that stuff, you know. Incredible the way in which this mechanism operates. So seeing, not only is seeing something incredibly sophisticated in the way in which we operate through seeing, but the other thing is that the moment that seeing becomes dominant, that's the moment that everything else is secondary. And everything else is secondary to the light from the beginning. Everything. You know, that's why we end up with all of these philosophies that the light is great and the light has all of this and blah, blah, blah. On and on and on and on and on and on. You know, because it's built into the construct of the Maya from the very beginning. It's built into the foundation of what the dimensional field is. That dimensional field is, you know, that we are attuned to the light and that vision becomes everything for us in that sense. And it's out of the vision that everything is marked. You know, that's the way in which we define everything. And of course, that's where the next delusion comes in, because the way in which we see is relative. You know, the bumblebee going towards the flower sees a different flower than what we see. You know, it's different. It's totally different. They're operating at another wavelength. I mean, there is this illusion of the way in which vision works, but seeing is everything to these people. So one of the things you're going to notice about first-base people is that they're going to be like the man from Missouri. They're going to say, show me. Show me. You know, these are not people that are going to be believers. As a matter of fact, it can make them quite uncomfortable because they can be so busy with what they think is right that they may not see what isn't. But nonetheless, whatever the case may be, the fact is that, you know, this is the main activity here. The main activity is seeing, is watching, is looking. Just about everything at the sexual level in humanity would disappear if it weren't for our eyeballs. I mean, after all, that's the sexiest part of a human being, isn't it? It's not about sexy in the sense of looking at them or seeing them. You can make something out of eyes if you like. It's just what the eyes do. You know, it's the eyes that are looking. It's the eyes that create the configuration. It's the eyes that have the illusion. It's the eyes that can take your clothes off. It's the eyes that do all of that. It's all in the eyes. You know, vision is our life. Vision is the world. You know, vision is the whole movie. I mean, you're handicapped if you're blind, eh? You know, I don't want to hear from the handicapped. You know. But if you feel so disposed, I can handle it. Send it to Suzanne. Every year, billions of people go to holiday resorts. Isn't that a funny way to start? For the view. Well, it's true, no? Okay, this is basic human nature. If you take a first base and you put that first base in the ghetto somewhere in one of the horror zones of America, that's going to be very disturbing from deep, deep, deep down inside. Because with this whole need to see, it's also about where you are. And that those people that are flocking to those points at which they can have a view, those are people that live in environments in which there is no view at all. You know, the next door building or whatever the case may be. And it's so important for us to think about that. It's one of those things where sometimes it would be nice to be some kind of 15th century teacher, you know, and I could just drop a cookie on you and walk away, you know, instead of being what I am, which is a mechanic. But, you know, really understand what that means. How important it is for a human being to be able to look out over a vista. I mean, it's a simple thing. It seems like an innocuous thing when we look at humanity as a whole and we think we don't even deal with that. We don't even really comprehend what that's all about. There's something very important for us, you see, to stare off into space. It's one of the most beautiful things that the measuring being does. It just stares off into space. You know, it stares off into the whole. It gets lost in the vibration of the whole. So this need to look out and see things, this need to view, this need to be in a nice place. You know, I'm very privileged. I wake up in the morning, I look at the red rocks of Sedona through my window. It's a beautiful thing to see. I mean, I have the second gate first line. My direction in life is aesthetics. So to look out that and to see that is a beautiful thing. It's very, very important to grasp. It's very basic inside of us. And it says that we really do damage to the spirit and the psyche of humanity by turning our landscapes, by turning our environments into ugly things. We just do. And the more we limit the ability, the possibility for people to see something of beauty, to see nature, to be able to look out and to be able to integrate with nature, that we're actually doing something that is fundamentally unhealthy. Now, when I say that, by the way, it's not like I want to create an organization to fix that. There's no choice in all that. It's all about awareness, but it's about understanding how important that is. You have to be able to have that as a living thing. You need to be able to look out. It also means something else. It means that everybody that comes in at the first base, that means that they are the ones that determine what the location must be and where they should be. You see, all that measuring is in order to find your place. And you got all these astrophysicists trying to figure out where we fit in within the whole totality. And all this measurement is trying to find your place. Where do we fit in? That's the whole thing about differentiation. Remember this thing about uniqueness and different are not the same. You see, where you are, birds of a feather, we all like to flock together. It's the way that those things work in us. And of course, that where is all about seeing where you can fit in. In other words, where you can have a location, where you can have a place, where you can be separate, but you're not physically isolated. Because after all, part of the program is, by the time you get up to design level, the time you get up to your rave chart, you get up to a configuration that says, excuse me, the vast majority of you are generators, the vast majority of you are split definitions, you all need each other, and you can't avoid it because we have to have more children. So, it's not about you can ever get away from all of that. You can't. Those forces, those genetic forces are all around. They're pulling you in your separateness into, bonding, into being in communities, into being in the collective, all of those various things. However, you have to see that as a base for these people, this is specifically important. Not only that, but what we will find is that if you historically could go back and you could look at the people that planted a flag and said, this is going to be New Booga Booga or whatever, some name for some place, that one of the things that you'll find about these people is that these people are going to carry a first base. They're the ones that are going to be the migrators. They're the ones that are going to pick the locations. They're the ones that are going to establish where the settlements are going to be. In other words, in some ways, pathfinders in that sense. They're the active ones. They're the moving ones. They're the ones that won't be satisfied sitting by the fire in the valley month after month, year after year. There's something inside of them that wants to see what's on the other side. And it's not because they necessarily are curious about what's on the other side. They'd like to know where they are. That's the whole thing. I mean, if you take somebody and you fly them into this little port up here of Sedona, this little airport, and you blindfold them and you dump them down in the middle of Sedona, they don't know where the hell they are. They might be somewhere. But in order for them to know where they are, they're going to have to go out and measure all of that. They're going to have to go out and move through all of that and then come back to where they started from so that they then can understand where they are. I'm on this street in this place, blah, blah, blah. So this is the whole thing that is moving humanity. It's moving humanity over each and every single one of these boundaries. It's moving humanity through all of these processes, but it's saying that deep underneath, place is enormously important for these people. If you've got a first base personality and you have an undefined self, you got a real blessing. Yeah, if you've got an undefined self, you're going to be told analytically that place is the most important thing for you in your life. and that you have to wait for place to be initiated in your life. Now, of course, here's somebody with a first base where place is going to be very important. Location is going to be very important. If they don't know where they are, now remember something. I want you to see this, that it moves through various levels. I'm being very mundane when I'm talking about physical location because that's where it all begins. Remember, this is every form of life, not just human. Each creature needs to establish what its territory is. And every creature, it's like you bring a dog or a cat into your life. The first thing they're going to do is examine the territory. It's only natural. This is a whole thing about life because it's a way in which you begin the process of defending yourself and protecting yourself. You define the territory that is around you in order to be secure so you know where you are in that. But that's not just about the mundane. You see, we are a hierarchical structure, or are a part of a hierarchical structure. We are all in the hierarchy. All of us. All of us. We're all strung out level after level after level after level in this process in the hierarchy, and all of us are always trying to figure out where we are in that. Oh, does Jesus love me? Where are we in the hierarchy? This is the first base. It's the first base that says, okay, I'm moving, but where did I get to? So if you got the first base and you've joined the button-down corporation, you got all this activity and juice inside of you, but there's that part of you that's saying, all right, but where am I getting to? Well, okay, I've moved up this far, maybe I can get to the next one. See, at the very, very base of what we are deeply, deeply competitive. Part of defining our uniqueness and seeing both our differences and our non-differences is that all leads to competitiveness. And it's not because we want to be competitive. Remember that at this level we have no access anyway. It's that life is competitive. That's what life is. Life is a competition. It's a competition against all natural forces. It's a competition against the resistance of ignorance. It's a competition against all of that. And if you don't win, you die, and you die sooner, and you die dumber. Now, there's nobody keeping score but you. And the score doesn't matter to anyone or anything. It's just you. Where am I is the question of the first base. Now that's close to Abbott and Costello. Eh? Where am I? You're on first. Where? Where's that? Where am I in my process? Where am I in my development? Where am I in my relationship? Where am I in my career? Where? All that measurement, all here, right from the beginning. When we were grouped together around the fire, the game was still going on. It's the oldest game in town. It's very, very difficult for me in my personal life to hold on to finding fault. There are moments I get annoyed, so those things last. But it's something that I recognize that is one of the great and most difficult steps for any human being in finding grace in this life. Once you get to the point that you can really understand the mechanical helplessness of all of us, the first base personality operating out of the not self and operating without awareness can be very obnoxious. It can be a part of an aggressive way of life and a dog-eat-dog world and a way of looking at humanity and a way of looking at others and a way of creating environments that end up being detrimental to others. And that in the end is unhealthy for the very beings that are generating all of that. But that comes out of a lack of awareness. It's not about fault. This is a beautiful energy after all. All of these bases are beautiful. How can they be anything else? And it's perfect within itself. It's not about us bringing our prejudices to these things and saying, oh, this is no good and that, blah, it's all crap. But it's also being able to recognize that the real truth of your intellectual understanding is your acceptance of that in your life as you meet it. Because of course you're going to meet this. Not only that, you will have aspects in your design activations that you have in certain gates. If you're not a first base personality, you're going to have at least one or two of them in your design. You're going to have a part of you that's attuned to that energy. Otherwise you couldn't be alive in this Maya. It's there. And it's about seeing that we need to get to a point of acceptance that the only thing that we can say to somebody is that, you might benefit from living out your type. Because it's not about fault. It's not about anything. It's about seeing that this is energy and how it works. So these people that are very fixed on where they are, and very fixed on maintaining the hierarchy. Remember, we need that. We need that. Nobody is going to get my place in the hierarchy because nobody else has that place in the hierarchy. Because that's just the way that it works. It's not about choice. It isn't about anything else. It's always like that for all of us. And the moment that we accept that we have a place in the role, for me, you must understand my own joke with the hierarchy. The voice told me I was its dog. So that's my relationship in the hierarchy to the voice, At that level, I'm just a good dog. I wag my tail. I'm very obedient. I know my place in the hierarchy, so it's not like I'm saying, whoa, up here. It's not about that. First of all, I'm not a first base, so I don't measure. But it's about understanding that the hierarchy is an essential ingredient in life because it's the way in which the information moves. And you see, the more sophisticated we become in the exchange of information, and again, that's the byproduct of the first base, all that activity, all that intellectual work, all that defining, we get to a point in which you can diffuse information at vast speeds. It's an extraordinary thing. And of course, this is what the first base is all involved with. But it all has to operate through the hierarchies. Now, the real evolution is to see that the lowest end of the scale, the lowest end of the hierarchical scale on the mundane plane on this planet is doing better, generally speaking, than ever before. But the fact is that 50% of the planet, that 50% of the planet has finally gotten to benefit from our place in civilization, and to remember that if you go back only about 150 years, only about 1% of the world population had the same benefits that about half of the world population have today. In other words, there has been a enrichment and education process that's taken place that has never before happened on this planet. And of course, that's the glory of the first base. What happens is that they have their difficulty when there's no place to go. You see, the whole thing about the yang is that the yang first base is penetrating out into the world to measure, to see the territory, to recognize its place, to find its position. Its difficulty only comes when all of that's established. After all, what are scientists? They're a bunch of wacko first base searchers. Busy, 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 busy. Gotta find it, gotta find it, gotta find it, gotta find it. That's all first base stuff. When you find it, what do you do? What do you do? It's like all of these uptight businessmen who work for 50 years, retire and drop dead in a week. What are you going to do? And of course, that ultimately is the crisis for this first facet, this first base. And they won't experience, by the way, that crisis until the transition takes place in the form itself. So it's a rather mystical conversation anyway. Nonetheless, it's important to see that there is a limitation in all of that. There's a limitation in all of that because the very definition of life can be mutated. The very definition of life can be mutated. Remember, life is relative to us. It's what we call life, after all. We make that up. We give life its name. Now, that doesn't mean that we understand how life works. That just means that we identify aspects of life, give them names, and define them. What I know is that what we call life, that ultimately life is going to be mutated. Life is going to have a different kind of definition. That different kind of definition isn't going to be dependent on multiplication. It isn't going to be dependent on population expansion, of growth, of diversity. It isn't going to operate mutatively in that way. It isn't going to operate through, warm, sentient bodies. So life can mutate. So that's when this first base will have to, have a change in the way in which it operates through the whole. So these last components here, where, seeing, location, these are the dominant themes. And so what's going to happen in the future is that we can get to a place where when we see somebody come in on the first base, one of the things that we're going to be very concerned about is what kind of an environment are they coming into? I've had enough children, so I've had enough experience with all kinds of fads in childbirthing. The water methods, the dark room music methods, all of these, the stand up in the field methods, all of these various things. And one of the things that's interesting is that a first-base child would benefit from, coming into a pleasant environment, coming into, for example, a home birth, or coming into an environment that's more soothing than would, traditionally be expected in a hospital, or those kinds of things. In other words, that from the very start, location for them is going to be very important. They will remember all of their life. And not conscious remember, just deep in the crystal awareness remembrance. They will remember all their life that they started off in a ugly room. Location, place, where they are is going to be very important for them. It also means that a first-base person is always going to need confirmation or affirmation of their process and progress. In America alone, at least according to my telephone calls, there must be 40 million salespeople. Eh? Something like that. And I know because in early on in my life, one of the many things that I did was that I trained salespeople. It's an interesting psychological thing. And if you imagine all these millions and millions of salespeople out there, all pitching, and what they're really interested in is not how much money they make. What they're interested in is whether they got more sales than the asshole in the cubbyhole next to them. And what they like best of all is at the end of the week or at the end of the month, all the results get posted on a board and everybody sees their place in the hierarchy. And that's as close as you get to being hunter-gatherers. It's as close as you get to being able to bring the thing in on your shoulder and lay it down and say, see what I'm doing for the community? And they're all living out that. That's what they're doing. They're all being busy, being in the hierarchy, being competitive with each other. And it's very important to them whether they're the salesman of the year or not. I once had a job when I was 19 years old, working for an insurance company, British Columbia. And my job was to go see young lumbermen, guys working in the forest cutting down trees, very dangerous business. And I had a routine. And the routine is that I would go into their house, and there was always young couples. They were always several years older than me. I was very young to be doing that. And they were skeptical also. And I would go in, and it would always be in their kitchen. I love this stuff, eh? And I would go down and I would sit down in the kitchen and I wouldn't say a word. Nothing. They'd get very uncomfortable. They slowly get antsy. And the whole time I'm looking at her. The whole time I'm looking at her. And I can feel, I did it so many times, eh? I know this energy from men, eh? It's such a funny energy. And you can feel that they're it's all this tribal male. So I would just look at her, and then, when I felt that there was enough tension, I would turn to the guy and I would say, do you want somebody to have to look after her if you die? And he'd say, how much is this? So I would go back into the office. And I'd go back into the office, and of course, at the end of, weeks or months, whatever, I was very good at that, and they would put me up on this hierarchy. I know the hierarchy really well. And they would put me up on this hierarchy, and they would blah, 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 and all of this stuff. And the guys below would bitch and scream, and, it's not fair. It's the way human beings are. It's the way they are. See, one of the things I like about my life, I've done a lot of things. And I know what the world and how the world operates, and all of those things are real. They're in all of us. And you could see the whole nature of what it is to be an animal, the competitiveness, all of that stuff, how important it was for people, whether they were first on the list or second on the list or third on the list. I mean, in America, you produce more lists than any country on earth. I mean, this is the country of lists. You have books of lists that you put out. I mean, it's endless. I got an 8-year-old kid. He brings them home. I end up in the middle of the day getting questions like, how many birds don't fly? I don't care. He's got some crazy list. Who's the tallest American president? I don't care. I mean, if you're a baseball fan, you can spend your whole life addicted to statistics. I mean, you can find out how many times a left-handed pitcher, hit a right-handed pitcher on a Wednesday night game, in the month of October. And they'll tell you hierarchies, lists. It's all here in the first base, and it's all part of life. People always talk about the Holocaust, but there's only one thing that makes the Holocaust a horror. Only one thing. Everything was listed. Everything. Everything was listed. I mean, the Japanese didn't do that in China. The Russians didn't do that in the Ukraine. I mean, can you imagine a Russian saying, geez, I better make a list of the dead? It would be absurd. The horrors, the list. Endless lists of information, lists. First base. It's what it's all about. If you go into that deep enough, there are some incredible things in there. See, that's us. It's all this measuring. It's all this putting on lists. It's how many supporters do you have? How much money did you raise last week, Al Gore? It's all about lists. It's all about the hierarchy. It's all about where you are. That's the foundation of life. Not human, life. It's not about us getting into this vanity trip that says we distort all this. That's the most vulgar vanity of all for me, is people who keep on accusing humanity of destroying the earth. I mean, the vanity of that is unbelievable. We don't have any choice in that, and no human being on this planet is wise enough to understand what all this means and why all of this works the way it does. And that the nature of pollution, or the nature of this, or the nature of that, what the long-term impact is on the development of our species and the way things work, nobody knows. This whole business about being negative about all these things, the vanity of thinking how important we are. This is about life itself. All life is like this. All life is interested in where they are. All life is there, being interested in where they are, responding to the light. That's life. All life is unique. All life is competitive. All life. I used to love it in Ibiza. Every once in a while, they'd have a make-work project. And that would mean that a dirt road would get paved, sort of. And the interesting thing about that is that what they would do is that they would spray the dirt, and they would lay down some gravel, and then they'd spray a kind of asphalt oil over that and leave it. And for the first 3 weeks, it looked like a road. And then something incredible would happen. You'd start watching life eat that road up. And one day you drive onto that road, and all of a sudden there's a plant that's pushed its way up through all of this stuff. And if you leave that road for 5 years, they take it back. It's gone. You know, there is a tenacious competitiveness in all of life. That's why if you're not living out who you are, life is so uncomfortable. It's not about the mundane application of what competitiveness means. It's about understanding that all life is struggling to be life. And that you take all the pressure off and you eliminate all the resistance the moment that you're living mechanically correctly within yourself. You honor your type. You honor what is your nature. You honor your authority. You'll see. That's very different. But this stuff, there's nothing we can do about that. That's part of what it is to be alive, and it's important for us to accept that. And it's important for us to see that there are forces in this life who have to live that out at every level in the spectrum. And they will. Making all the lists, figuring out all the hierarchies, doing all of that, ultimately selfishly, so that they can know their place. And it's the first thing for us to be able to do. From the very beginning, when we looked at the sky, we started this process of saying, where the hell are we? Where is this? What is this? Where am I? We were on the backs of turtles and, where am I? It's what it's all about from the very beginning. Find your place, secure your territory. Be able to see those that are familiar to you. And to keep on making your list until you list everything. And when you've got everything listed, then you can retire. Okay, we're going to move away from these bizarre, fanatical first base types. And the second base is called integrative. And again, remember that as I'm taking you through from the yang to the yin, until we get to the fifth base, which of course is the base that is the result of the other four. It's the space created or the effect created out of the other four. So here what we're looking at is that we're looking at the second base, and this second base is yang yin. The first base is pure yang. It's pure yang. It's yang yang. Now, mystically, I've got you to a place that can either make you uncomfortable or not. If Randy's base is accurate, he's not coming back. No joke. No joke. Yang yang is going to be eliminated. Now, it doesn't mean he may not come back for another life. He may have time between now and when it all comes to an end, but if he really has a yang-yang base, when that time comes, that yang-yang gets annihilated. It's going to disappear. I've never been in a hurry to get people to see their bases because I don't know how people handle such information. I don't know what they do with that. Not that it's anything personal, by the way, because it isn't going to make any difference to Randy.
Yeah, they're not coming back here, but they're going somewhere,
If he's invited, he'll go.
I said annihilated. I didn't say coming back. I didn't say hanging around. Annihilated. Annihilated. This is where we have all of our concepts of hell and all of our concepts of the burning. The fact of the matter is that the yang-yang crystal will be annihilated and will be annihilated in the heart of our sun. I mean, when the crystals bundle, when the change comes, those that are yang-yang, they will stream into the sun. And in fact, they become fuel. It's the way, yes. Not only fodder in that sense, but all the stored consciousness, everything that has been experienced in the eternity of that crystal's existence, as it breaks down in the sun, all of that will be spread out as fertilizer for everybody else. Oh, yeah. Randy's going to shit on you eventually. Yes. It's the magic of the way things work. So when you get down to this level and you get down to a base that's yang-yang, you have to understand that yang-yang base, anybody that's walking around with the first base, that yang-yang base, as I said, it's really going to have its ups and downs, and it really is going to be eliminated because that's what the yang-yang's all about. By the way, that isn't a moral thing. Again, so important to recognize that. I mean, it's just has nothing to do with that. It has to do with evolution, and it has to do with the necessity of the totality. That everything has its time and everything gets its run. The yang-yang's had a great run. I mean, it's had a great run. And that run is coming to the end. And the cosmic gods will give Randy his golden watch. And say, thank you very much for your 14 billion years of service. And now you're going to heat my apartment. Thank you very much. Ain't life grand? Yeah, it's the way it works. It's the way evolution works. It's only cruel if you think of that in deep personal terms, because it isn't. Everything comes to an end. All right, let's go to the second base, and we have the second base. This is integrative, so this is the yang force in essence that's really going to remain. I mean, this is the yang yin. This is the power of the yang, the power of the penetrating force, but it is balanced with the presence of the yin as a counterpoint. And so here what we have is that all of this is about experience. It's not about the movement anymore. That's pure yang. Now the yin is coming in and saying, yes, but excuse me, while we're moving along, what exactly is happening? This is the beginning of mind. Now remember that mind is something that's very physical, regardless of how we try to tune into it at other levels. It's a machine. And mind is a byproduct of the way in which this machine operates. And it's one of the things to recognize about the evolutionary process is that the evolutionary process demands that we learn from experience. Now, whether that learning is the way that we do it here, for example, in a classroom environment, or whether that learning is an evolutionary learning, in other words, a response to certain pollutants in the air, and something inside of the mechanism of that species changes as a response. In other words, the experience itself, not the movement, but the experience within the movement, this becomes the criteria, this becomes the thing that's so important to the second base being. In other words, they don't want to just see that they're separate, they want to see, for example, how separate things fit together. In other words, they want to see the way in which that operates as experience. And so this whole process of the second base, this movement away from the pure yang, you don't have this same kind of, just pure activity as drive. There's something else that's stepping in. And there's something else that's stepping in for a very, very basic reason. We'll get there later as we discuss this, but I want to bring it to you now. Remember that each of these bases has a relationship to senses. And if you look of the sense that's connected here to the second base, you will see that it is taste. Now, taste is very different than vision. It's very different. And that the tasting of something is something that is deeply personal because you cannot taste unless you allow something into you. Think about that. Vision is something that is very safe. It's very safe. Is not, as long as you don't have a homicidal maniac in your face and you're staring them down, I mean, vision is something that doesn't bring all that. But taste says, come here, closer. No, closer. No, closer. See, this is where mind comes from. It's where mind comes from. You know, literally, I guarantee you, if you go back to the very, very source in the embryo, you'll find that the taste bud was there before the brain bud. You know, because that's where it takes us. Have you ever imagined or read about how profound our capacity is to be able to recognize through taste? I mean, it's extraordinary. Let alone the zillions of taste buds that you have in your mouth. In other words, this is a very, very, very basic thing that ultimately in our evolutionary process leads from tasting things to literally being able to intellectually sample them, intellectually taste them. This is the whole development of the mind process. Now, I want to take you to the larger plane for a moment. You see, the biverse is mind. I mean, this totality, it's alive, it's conscious, and it's desperately working at awareness. Mind is a general theme. And it means that whatever the totality happens to be, whatever the biverse is ultimately in terms of the environment that it can enter into as a new form, you know, whatever that's going to be, the nature of it that's here in the womb, you know, what we live out, what our process is, all of these things, that we're going to see that what's out there on the outside is mind at a level that we do not grasp because we're still not in the totality of what the mental consciousness is. I have funny conversations with people. And you know, for many, many years, I always got these conversations about how human design is mental. It really is like saying the Pope's Catholic. I mean, I don't know why people have to make a point of that, but nonetheless they do. They like to make a point of that. They say, design is mental. And what I've never said to them, which is something I only thought about in this moment, which is a delight, is that, you know, God's mental. You know, the totality is mental. You know, it's all mental. The whole damn thing is, if it wasn't for the mental, you know, we forget that in a hurry. It's all mind. It's the great mind. You know, it is a mind, an enormous, incredible, conscious mind that's developing. I mean, we're at the source of all of that. So the first thing to see is that evolution and mind, that they are linked in this facet. They're linked in the facet. If you go back and you look at the first and you see that it's individuality and movement, that's what that facet is about. But this facet here is mind and evolution. That the movement leads to evolution. That the individuality becomes mind. You know, this is their relationship to each other. And of course, it's only when you get to that point, only when you get to that combination of mind evolving, that you begin to see what the big program is all about. The big program is every blade of grass, every tree, every ant, every being is all involved in the evolution of mind. That's not, you know, our little boxes. I mean, that's the mind. Because that's what it's all about. And it's the mind, ultimately, that's going to have the deepest impact. If you think that what we can do now, cloning, etc., is something, wait. You know, we're really good at manipulating. That's our job. The more we move, the more active we are in that yang. And remember, the yang is coming to the end, so we don't need much more activity. We don't need much more defining. We're at the end of the defining string. Now it's not about defining, it's about seeing that out of that definition comes the growth of mind. And by being able to understand where you are and being able to grasp the territory in where you are and becoming secure in that, then you can evolve there. Grow out of that. What I like is that the quality here is the quality of character. Now, character can be a deeply, deeply subjective thing. But when you look at the nature of evolution as it operates within the macrocosm, then one of the things that's deeply connected to evolution is gravity and memory. That is, that they are in a deep relationship to each other. In other words, the capacity to be able to pull things towards you is in fact what memory is. In other words, the ability to be able to hold things to you, store them, and in that sense hold them as remembrance. This second base, that's what mind actually ends up being the beneficiary of. It's the beneficiary of being able to bring things together, hold them together, gravitate towards certain things. But at the same time, mind is built on the capacity to remember. Remember. No evolution without remembering. And that's obvious to us. It's obvious to us because we've already seen it happen. We know that our ability to store memory, libraries, and now, computers, web, blah, 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 our ability to store memory has speeded up the evolution of our civilization. It doesn't speed up our physical evolution, but it certainly speeded up the evolution of our civilization. The storage of memory is something that's essential. So look, there's a major transition that takes place when you move from the first to the second base. Because the moment that you move to the second base, it's not about being alive is enough anymore. Being busy isn't enough anymore. It isn't. Now the experience has to really be something of value, and the experience has to be the kind of experience that gives you the sense that you're moving forward. In other words, that you're evolving, that you're expanding. Why do you think we spend so much time educating human beings? This is a second base theme. I mean, it's one of the most important things about human beings. We already know that just as a mammal, we need extended nurturing, 7 years, which is very long for a newborn mammal to need for nurturing. The fact is that when you're looking here at the second base, it brings very, very basic fundamental things. It brings the need to expand mind, to grow in that sense, to educate in that sense. It's not an accident that it's integrative. It has to be integrative. It's also something else. This is where there is this aroma of sex, but there is none. There's an aroma of it, but there is none. Sex comes later. It comes when it's absolutely necessary, as you'll see. It comes when it gets to the point that we got all the basic structure in. Let's bring in a dimension that says we'll make more and we'll have all of that and because right here what you're looking at is that you're looking at what is going to be the strongest place of the meeting of the yin and the yang. It isn't now. That's something that's going to develop over time. So, this quality of character, it's about coming to grips with one's nature. I mean, that's what it's about. You see, the what is so important to the second base. It's not where is the way. What is that way? It's the what. It's the substance of it. In other words, this has so much to do with the basic, cosmic kleptomania of humanity. Kleptomania, by the way, is a disease of having to steal things. Here we are pulling everything towards us, trying to store everything. Go into anybody's house. Look at all the stuff you're holding on to. Look at all the memory that you're storing. I go into most people's places and they got, 20, 100, 500, 1,000 CDs. They listen to 3 a month. All that stuff stored there. They get all that memory stored there. And that memory is part of what defines their character. Now think about something. When you finally find your location, and you have a second base person who's been dragged along by a first base frontiers person, and you get to that location and the first base says, hey, look, this is a great place. The second base says, where am I going to live? What am I going to do for shelter? It's not the where. And one of the things about the whole nature of pulling things towards you is that when you look at that at various different levels of life, you could, call it the nesting instinct. You go out there and you get that little leaf and you bring it back. You go out there and you get that little piece of twig and you bring it back. And you go out there and you get that little thing and you bring it back. And you keep on storing it around you. It's one of the things about understanding that the second base begins the process of concretizing materially. After all, this is the combination of the yang and the yin. And the yin says, it's nice that we're here, but there's no curtains, or whatever the case may be. Let's do something about that. And out of that, we get the first criminals. Architects. Are there any architects here? Have I offended anybody personally?
Confused us.
Oh, did I? Okay. First architects. First criminals. The moment that you build a roof, you separate yourself from the totality in your consciousness. It's just a funny thing. On full moon night, go to New York City. Go visit a friend. Okay? And then tell them that it's full moon. They don't even see it most of the time. They don't really know what's going on because, of course, it's not their fault. They're not connected to the sky anymore. That's my joke about the first criminals. I don't mean to upset architects. However, this is where out of the second base comes these horrible criminals who say, this is a wonderful place, but I need shelter. And of course, the moment you create that shelter, you create something totally different. You create an interior world. And interior worlds are very different. They're very different. The more I travel in my life and the more places that I've seen, it's such an amazing thing to see the transition between what is that outside territory and what are the private inside worlds. And the moment that we create that, we create an interior environment, we create something essential for the individual and the development of individual mind. We create a place of security and sanctity, a place of protection, a place of where we can separate our mind and allow our mind to operate in freedom that is separated from what else is around us. So one of the things about evolution is that through the evolutionary process, because this is connected to our gravitating together, every community is a ghetto. That's what communities are. You have forces that gravitate together. And of course, built into this second base is this movement, this gravitational pulling. It's a very interesting thing. A first base person can find a new place where people could create a settlement. But until the second base person lives there, the others don't come. It's not where. I don't care where it is. What's there? What's there? Do they have electricity? Do the toilets self-flush? What's there? This is a second base theme. this goes back to character.